We are very pleased to organize this cozy gathering here in our office space in a fishbowl format. We thought it would be, the topic is serious enough so that we would need a really, let's say, a bit of a new and interactive format to get into the discussion. So what you basically see here is the inner circle is the panel, and then obviously the audience is around this inner circle, but there's two free seats here, always open for anybody from the audience to step forward, sit down and ask a question, make a comment, and have a contribution to the discussion. But before that, I would really like to warmly welcome our panelists. First of all, we have to my left Sebastian Schäffer, the director of the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe, and Ulrich Schneckener, professor of international relations, peace and conflict research at the University of Osnabrück. They will basically do the initial input with a presentation of a paper they have written on the Greater European Council, the idea of a Greater European Council. To my right here, we're very pleased to make your acquaintance and welcome you here, Mrs. Hannah Smith. She's a senior strategic advisor in the Office of the Secretary General of probably the most important pan-European organization, of course, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. And also my colleague here on the panel, Stefan Melle, the director of the Dialogue Office for Civil Society Cooperation here in Vienna. My name is Simon Ilse. I'm the head of the unit for human security, foreign and security policy here at the Dialogue Office as well. Just very few notes to get us started and before we get to the presentation of the paper. I think it's important to note that we are, of course, when we planned this, I know it's already almost completely summer. We still thought this is a good idea to do it, to welcome you here and also have a bit of a summer gathering afterwards. But these moments never happen in a void or in a vacuum. We have the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. happening this week. We have news about Russia actually leaving the Parliamentary Assembly recently of the OSCE. Finally, we have seen a horrific attack, unfortunately, again yesterday on Kiev and several other Ukrainian cities, pediatric hospital, unfortunately very brutally hit with no regards for international norms and standards. We have also seen elections, many elections. This is the election year, 2024. Most recently, of course, the elections in France and the United Kingdom, with, to say the least, interesting results. And of course, the EU parliamentary elections, which has seen a rise in far-right members, but also kind of a bolstering, let's say, of the center-right majority. And we will see how the new European Commission will form after the summer. We think this is it's important to basically debate ideas about the future of the European security order, and not only about its security in Europe, but also, of course, the integration and enlargement of Europe. And as is very well outlined in your paper, there's been many ideas have been floated about how to organize Europe's security and cooperation, to find platforms for dialogue, diplomacy, and cooperation. And it still looks as if the institutions today are not at the top of the challenge, to perhaps put it like that. And I think it's valid to also in such a frame, sometimes to discuss ideas that can maybe look a bit utopian or new or give impulses to the topics that we need to come together around. I think undoubtedly. So I leave it at that because that's already enough, and I would like to give it over to our two authors of the paper. That is, by the way, also in German language. Basically outlined at the table in front of the reception. And you can, of course, also download it and find it online in both English and German. I think it's pretty easy to find. And I'll hand it over to you, Professor Schneckner, to start us off.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you also for hosting us and giving us the opportunity to present these ideas here. And thank you all for coming at this hot evening. But at least here, this feels more cool here in this room, actually. I like to start with the fact that we are also looking ahead of another event. You were mentioning NATO Summit coming up, but also we will see next week on July 18, the fourth meeting of the so-called European Political Community. I'm sure you all have heard about that. It will take place at Blenheim Palace in UK. So the new Prime Minister can then welcome and learn basically all the heads of states of 47 European states at Blenheim Castle or Blenheim Palace. It's actually the birthplace of Winston Churchill because it used to be a property of the Churchill family. So maybe the spirit of Winston Churchill will enlight the 47 heads of state next week. We have to see. But also, I think in this light, we should also see a bit what I would like and Sebastian would like to present to you. We have heard, of course, a lot of terms when we talk about new European security order, emerging security order, challenge security order, the end of an old order, a new order. So the terms are the German term Zeitenwende for European security. Of course, everybody's familiar with that. Or if you read the EU Strategic Compass, you find the term tectonic shift. So something is happening, and we all feel that, but we don't know where this might lead and what that actually means for European security order. Before I try to assess the current situation, I just want to point out that in order not to be misunderstood, our perspective is not that we had like a well-governed European security order over the past 30 years, and then something happened, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that was the end of this European security order. Yeah? So that's not the idea. I think if people understand Zeitenwende like that, they get it wrong. Yeah? Because what we have seen since the end of the Cold War is we haven't never had a real pan-European security order in full-fledged. Or a European order of collective security. What we had were different overlapping layers of cooperative security, which is different from collective security. And these layers were provided certainly by some kind of interplay of the OSCE, NATO plus, as I could call it, and EU plus. And I think that is now challenged. This type of order, which we have seen and which worked for almost 30 years, sometimes better, sometimes worse, this is now very much challenged. And why? Because that would be our premise, that we see that European security, for the time being at least, will not be with or without Russia, but basically organized against Putin's Russia. So we will see much more, and we see it already, much more confrontational aspects of this emerging security order, or this emerging security order is more shaped by these confrontational aspects. So moving from cooperative forms to more confrontational aspects. But, and that would be one of our arguments, is that this would also imply the need for deeper security cooperation among EU and non-EU states in Europe. So if you have this confrontational aspect on the one hand, you still would need deeper cooperation at the same time within the rest of Europe. If we now assess this current situation, we have to say, and I'm sure we will have disagreement on that, the OSCE for the time being seems to be paralyzed, and there's a danger of further marginalization even. And it's very questionable whether it can play the role of a pan-European forum for cooperative security at least in the short term, but maybe also not in the midterm. We have, on the other hand, seen a certain revival of NATO. You're all familiar with that. We see new members of NATO. We see an increase of European NATO members increasing their defense capacities. We see the further deployment of forward forces, forward presences in NATO Eastern European member states. And we have a change in EU politics. First, of course, this incremental, I would say, sanction policy against Russia on the one hand, and of course, the organizing of financial, military, and humanitarian support for Ukraine, in particular already with regard of rebuilding Ukraine. I think that's a major effort the EU has to take and will take. On the security side, we see the strengthening of EU-NATO cooperation. We see a reviving of the EU enlargement debate, which for a long time has been like, not dead, but there was this kind of enlargement fatigue. But we see now enlargement is back on stage. We see the new candidate status for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And there's an utter need for new and a remake of the EU neighborhood policy. I think the Eastern Partnership is more or less obsolete, and though something new has to be done. And we think that all of that comes together, so that I think when we think about European security order, we will have this interlinkage of EU security, enlargement, and neighborhood policy. So these three subjects cannot be being divided anymore. So the dual challenge is the following. First, short term, there's a need to enhance and deepen the security cooperation between EU and non-EU states in order not to keep Eastern European states further in limbo before they actually can join Euro-Atlantic institutions. And second, in midterm, the need to speed up accession processes for the candidate states. And I think we think both dual challenges can only be tackled if we think more creative, more innovative about new formats in which EU and non-EU states can cooperate and work on these issues. Well, the European political community, is this the answer? Because I think that institutional gap was also seen by Macron, and he came up with this initiative to set up the European political community. I think most of you are aware that we had 3 summits so far. The first in the Czech Republic in Prague in October 22, followed by the second summit in Moldova, and the third summit in Spain in October last year. So far, this is set up as a biannual informal meeting, a platform for political dialogue with no decisions, no actions to be taken, no final conclusions. There's a family picture. This seems to be the most important thing. And we already saw at the third summit in Spain, in Granada last year, that the future of this format is rather in question. We had already some signs that some people didn't show up anymore, like Erdogan, for instance. And also there were questions about the next meeting. There was no time for the next meeting. It was not even clear whether the UK government would really sponsor that next meeting. So there were a lot of open questions, and we think that this format cannot be sustained in this way. It needs to be either further developed or it will not be a long-lived exercise. And moreover, it cannot deliver on this dual challenge I was referring to. So what needs to be done? We think building not a new organization, but maybe an idea could be to transfer the EPC into something what we call the Greater European Council. And we understand the Greater European Council as an EU plus format, which is closely linked to the EU Council architecture, but not part of the EU institutions. That's important, that this will not be an EU institution. It will be an institution, a council which is linked to EU institutions, but it's not like an incorporated part of it. So what is this idea and concept of the Greater European Council about? We think that is needed for strengthening the cooperative security between EU and non-EU states. And we see also here some analogy to what actually NATO did in the early 1990s, when NATO set up the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council, where they also gathered the non-NATO countries around them in that format. This Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council still exists until today. It may not be that important anymore, but it's still there. And it's not about copy and paste, it's just showing that others did that before. How we think about this Greater European Council? What would be the institutional design? We would see that as a multilateral body for the EU 27, plus the EU non-members, candidate states as well as non-candidate states, those who will not join the EU or have they don't want to join the EU, or they just left the EU, like the UK. And this should be then the main forum for like wider European policy issues, in particular in security related, but also beyond security, also security in a wider sense, I would say. We would connect that Greater European Council directly with the European Council and with the EU Foreign Affairs Council, and maybe successively other thematic council corporations could also be used in this extended version. Yeah? We would rather propose that the Greater European Council should be co-chaired by the President of the European Council and by a rotating non-EU member state. So in order to make clear that this is not an EU institution, that on top you have the EU presidency, and you have a non-EU state co-chairing this. It should not be designed as a consultative forum, not another talking shop, but as at least a body which is able to make decisions. Does not mean that they will always take decisions, but at least there should be the ambition, aiming at common positions and joint actions on pan-European and trans-regional security issues, but also on socio-economic, mobility, energy, technology, and environmental questions. For this, it needs to be also have access to resources and funds for these joint actions. I think here the EU Commission and also other European financial institutions could provide funds, also which will also be available for that Greater European Council format. Some of the money is already there, needs to be pulled for that purpose. But also, of course, non-EU member states like the UK and other, Switzerland and so on, that could also contribute for that, so that also common programs and some common actions could be financed. It should also allow for coalitions of the willing within that format, because I think we all see it's already difficult to agree to achieve a consensus among 27 EU member states. It will even be more difficult in a much larger figuration of states. That's why we need also like a flexibility in this format. So not everything needs to have the consent of all participants. So there are options, also maybe smaller groups, as we see this with the EPC already. Within the EPC, we have already some concrete projects going on where only few states are participating. So that actually could also still be the case here. On the other hand, one needs to avoid an instrumentalization of for bilateral conflicts, which we still have among these European states, be that EU states or non-EU states. So think about Serbia and Kosovo, Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, this kind of things. Already at the APC, people came to the APC in order just to launch this kind of measures, everybody knows already. Yeah? So it's difficult to avoid that instrumentalization of such a format for like bilateral conflicts and bilateral disagreements among participants. But what could at least work on that, and there could be the possibility to offer within that format also bilateral consultations and facilitation, mediation by the co-chair of the Greater European Council, which when with that could be an established procedure that the co-chair also deals or has a role with these bilateral issues. For implementing the Greater European Council, no formal EU treaty or reform or something like that would be necessary, not at all. But it simply needs the political will to do so among the 27 EU members and non-EU states who would like to participate here. I think it should also be who does not want to participate should not participate. It should be still an open door for everybody, but you should start somewhere. So you should not have the consent of everyone, but you should simply start somewhere. And if this develops a good dynamic, you can expect that others want to be part of that. Yeah? So because it's always better to be at the table than to be outside. And we also think that another function could be that that this would offer a flexible format for those who do not want to join the EU eventually, like UK, Switzerland, Norway, others, but also has a potential for functioning as an enabler, as a facilitator for a gradual transition to EU member states, to EU membership for applicant states, so that some in this enlargement process, some would then eventually change their position at the table. And this is where I hand over to Sebastian.
Thank you, Ulrich. I'll try to be very brief on these points so we can go into the discussion. Basically, the added value to the things that Ulrich described would be that we would solve a challenge that we have not been really tackling for the past decade, we could even say for the past 21 years, which means we have to become serious when we talk about enlargement, and this also entails a reform of the treaty. And the best time for the treaty reform would have been after Brexit, because there were three processes: entanglement, new relationship, and then internally how to work together. We did two. The third one we were not brave enough to start that. The latest time should have been actually after the conference on the future of Europe, but then Emmanuel Macron hijacked the overall outcome with proposing this EPC. And this is where we thought, okay, let's use this challenge and turn it into an opportunity. Be brave now, bring deepening and widening back together again. By 2030, the goal should be that we have a new treaty with new members, qualified majority decisions, initiative for the European Parliament. And if you put things into perspective, the Treaty of Nice to the Treaty of Lisbon, where we had negative referendums in France and the Netherlands, then a negative referendum on the initial Treaty of Lisbon following the Treaty for a Constitution for Europe, took 5.5 years. And the longest accession negotiation so far took 6.4 years. And that was just Lisbon. Which means if we speed up and be serious in this regard, we are able to actually fulfill this within a term of the Commission or with a perspective until 2030. Also, we would only bring the population to a size that we have already had, because coincidentally, the population of all candidate countries, minus Turkey, because for obvious reasons, that is a whole different story. is 67 million, which is the number of people that live in the UK. Of course, the GDP combined of those non-candidate countries is a tenth of the United Kingdom, but if we are thinking back on enlargement that has happened in the past, that was predominantly the reason to stabilize democracy. 81, 86, 1990, 2004, 2007, the last time over a decade ago, 2013. And we are afraid that maybe we will not lead these negotiations to an end, and there will not be a new treaty, which should not be seen as a failure, because we have the Treaty of Lisbon, which is a functioning treaty, which can also be, to a certain extent, adapted in itself. But I have the feeling that the European Union far too often only reacts instead of having a plan B and starting with a plan A. The plan A would be treaty reform. It becomes necessary, as I mentioned, the promise of Thessaloniki of legal drinking age in the United States. It's 21 years old. The previous concepts for enlargement, be it staged accession, be it a first integration into the European Economic Community, be it immediate accession through the European Union, are there, but seem not to bring enlargement forward, which means ultimately we should be brave enough to bring that forward, but it will take some time. We can speed up the process to a certain extent. We could stop using vetoes in the process of opening and closing certain chapters, but overall the process is there and will take some time. And in order to bridge that, the Greater European Council provides an opportunity, because we have, again, as already mentioned, the big advantage that we have current non-EU member states sitting at the table, socializing, returning, being part of those meetings, sitting around the table, having a voice. We have, through this, a smoother transition from being a candidate country to becoming a full member, while at the same time not excluding countries that do not want to become a member or will not join in the next century, as the new Prime Minister of the UK stated very early on. And if the Greater European Council arrives at a certain position, that of course also increases the legitimacy of EU policies. And if we act in a sort of voluntary basis in a coalition of the willing, if it functions with 40 plus countries, we might be able to also actually bring that into directives or regulations on a EU level. And then, of course, the Greater European Council could also work as a testing ground for policies that are not already on a supranational level in Brussels, because if we again have here 40 plus countries agreeing that we should do something here, then maybe this can also be something that transforms into the EU level, strengthens the EU's regional and global clout, and infuses finally the notion of strategic autonomy with actually concrete action. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to both of you for presenting your the ideas and the paper. And I think it became very clear that we are in the search of a platform, of a new modus operandi to facilitate cooperation between EU member states and non-EU member states, nevertheless European states, against Russia, or let's say in the face of a autocratic threat that is probably going beyond Russia even. How does this look like from the, or sound like from the perspective of the OSCE, who has a lot of experience actually in exactly being that platform?
Okay, yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Extremely interesting already, the starting point. First of all, I have to do a disclaimer in the way that I do not now represent officially OSCE or their views, neither as an organization or the Secretary General. So I'm here now as an expert. My title is advisor, and that means that there is an expert background, and therefore these views that I now say, obviously they come through the work, but do not reflect OSCE as such. So it is quite fascinating. First of all, I have to say this thing that where we are, that is possibly the key analysis point, in the way that everybody is talking about not necessarily a broken order or possibly broken order, but this thing that now we are in a transition. We have left behind something old and are moving towards something new, and nobody knows exactly what it is. And that type of a situation creates also a need to find new ideas, need to find new things. And that's actually quite natural. That happens very often. Then, of course, comes the kind of the question of when looking at the old things, and perhaps the question rises, okay, but why the old things might not be any more good? What's the reason? And here we heard in the beginning that, at least from the OSCE perspective, OSCE is paralyzed, right? It is in deep troubles. It is true that the organization does not have approved budget since 2021. It now has the chair for the 25, but it's not agreed chairs. There needs to be always a chair. And the top 4 post with the Secretariat and 3 institutions is again open and there is no kind of new mandate decisions in the consensus principle again since 21. So does this mean that the organization is paralyzed? I would argue quite strongly no. And therefore, which is not surprising, obviously, but let me explain why. Because first of all, the OSCE format is very flexible. And that's why I would almost start questioning why those things that you are proposing in your Creative European Council could not be done in the OSCE context. Since there is the extra budgetary mechanism, which means that the volunteer contributions go to a project that supports a particular thing. So with this, for example, there is a great project on the support of Ukraine. Yes, there are some OSCE members who do not subscribe to this, but we are talking about projects from demining, even supporting the rule of law reforms in Ukraine, the displaced people. In fact, the Moscow mechanism, which is not even an extra budgetary project, which means that doing reports if a member state asks, so this is not a consensus principle, has done actually a lot on relating to the human right issue, on displaced children. Also, there has been on national minorities and so on. So OSCE does a lot of things that not every single participating state like. But if someone asks, there is a mechanism how that kind of works. So and all the mandates that have been approved since 1990 at least, actually probably since 1975, are valid. So that means that there is a big pile of things that are already approved as a consensus principle and can be done. OSCE works, in fact, quite a bit with the EU. And I was quite fascinated to hear how you described that what the Greater European Council should be doing, because obviously to organize discussions with the non-EU member states, a platform. I was kind of thinking, that's what keeps happening in the Hofbund on nearly a weekly basis in that way. And several of these projects, when you talked about the resources, putting resources funds, things like that. That is exactly, but it has to happen in the way that the country in question approves it. So there is a country in question approves it, and the coalition are willing to fund a project. And this does not require a consensus principle. Then relating to perhaps the outreach of also the Greater European Council idea, Central Asia clearly is not part of that. But I would argue that Central Asia is a quite central part of European security thinking. So without kind of taking Central Asia into consideration, perhaps we are not talking about a kind of overall European security kind of order or constellation or something like that. So in that way, this is quite kind of fascinating, but I assume also that you want to challenge as well the fact that us to discuss, and I now understood that this kind of accelerating the EU membership factor, but all rule of law projects, for example, even when it comes to media laws, engagements with the civil society and all of that, that framework exists inside of the OSCE. It is true that Russia is there. I was quite interested of also this idea that now for foreseeable future, the policies are against Russia. To some extent, you have a case there, but is it fully like that? In the way that there are several EU, and now several, not only two, but several of EU member states who are arguing also in the way that there has to be the channels of communication open, we cannot close everything, the war will finish in one point, it might even come sooner than we expect. And so again, is that the future that the policy is really created against? It's more on your framework, I would say, the authoritarian tendencies, because a lot of OSCE work is about rule of law, supporting democratization processes. Again, from the perspective, if the state wants themselves. If they don't, then obviously OSCE cannot do anything. But it's not about what Russia wants or not wanting, it is about what participating states want. So from the OSCE perspective, I suppose this would be my kind of the opening. I'm fully happy to be challenged about that so that we can have the dialogue on more practicalities. And obviously, I'm not trying to say that there isn't a problem. There is a lot that can be done. But there are definitely what you talked about on this, like not hijacking on a bilateral issues or own interests and things like that. OSCE's history is full of that. Yeah. It's basically based on the fact that there would be a platform of taking that. And actually, perhaps a question even to you, how do you foresee that there is any international political platform that will not? So what's the mechanism to remove those from that bigger picture? Because I think OSCE would be very interested in any proposal of how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting perspective, and I think you managed really well to explain this flexibility within OSCE as well. I also have to maybe add that in reading your proposal and idea from the human security, for example, perspective, and this idea of a civic military approach also to questions of security. So far, of course, the idea is very intergovernmental, right? And in here, Ms. Smith mentioned actually mechanisms that, of course, the OSCE already has that is very much below the state level. But over to our last panelist, Stefan Melle. How do you look at these questions? And then we are happily opening up, and you can already eye for the open seats here.
Yes, I hope very much for this discussion, because of course very not only interesting, it's really important for our European future, yeah, and it's a core issue. I think that a lot of people do not know actually about this European political community, yeah, and that they would not follow this event next week. We will see. Yeah, maybe after this event a bit more. Yeah, but it is so far not very established format. Yeah, and to re-establish it to a broader, greater council is also very far, I would say. Yeah, my main question is why the organizations we have could not tackle the internal conflicts. Yeah, what was the problem? Yeah, and Hannah Smith very convincing explained why there was a hope to start with the OCE and to have it all the 50 years. Next year we will have here the anniversary, 50 years, yeah? And starting with a conference and getting later a really permanent organization, yeah, with a lot of substructures also, yeah? Also the school thing of Odir in Warsaw, yeah? And yeah, this is really not only a big experience, but it's really a lot of tools. Yeah? And but when they are on human rights, on media freedom, on anti-discrimination, on equal rights of women and other groups, yeah, vulnerable groups, of election monitoring, yeah, all this can work when all will agree with that. Yeah, that it is a common principle, a common value, yeah, and that was in the 90s a fact. Yeah, all more or less agreed with it. Yeah, and then it could really could be elaborated these tools which we try to use until now. Yeah, but Anna already mentioned this Moscow mechanism. Yeah, what is it? It is sending missions of experts to assist participating states in the resolution of a particular question or problem relating to the human dimension. Yeah? So if the organization or maybe a group in the country sees a problem, yeah, they can apply it to the OC and say, we should somehow solve it. And OC will say, yeah, we can consult, yeah, we can help, yeah, and we can help to improve it. Yeah? And we'll send some people, experts analyzing it and then preparing some recommendations and so on and so on. But if the government of this country in question is not ready to accept it and is already not on the basis of these values, it will not work. Yeah? And one of the last cases we had in the OCE with this Moscow mechanism was the question of crimes of the dictator, human rights violations in Belarus. Yeah? And there was also sent an expert who should understand how could it be resolved. Yeah? Now, in fact, only if Lukashenko will cut the own regime. Yeah? And there's, of course, not such a consent. Yeah? And in the end, this more and more left coalition of the willing, yeah, created a new structure. It was the International Accountability Platform for Belarus. And it was with the participation of 70 countries and had a big role the Polish government, the German government, and some others. Yeah, in the end, it was seems ruled by a Danish organization, Danish human rights organization. And what do we see? More political prisoners in Belarus. Any crimes really, they are fixed. Yes, we know about them. Yeah, we know a lot about them. And that's all. Yeah. We could not improve it. Yeah. So this idea to have like-minded coalitions, platforms, initiatives, yeah, they are all in the end quite weak. Yeah? They have no possibilities to enforcement, to law enforcement, yeah, and to implement their so-called recommendations. Yeah? And the same was unfortunately true also for the special monitoring mission to Ukraine. Yeah, what was really a big failure of the OSCE, but it's not a question to the OSCE. It's a question also to the construction, yeah, to this construct. And when the Russian regime already was not willing to give anything, yeah, even not some point for people living in this East Ukraine, yeah, to cross the front line, this so-called contact line, yeah, then also it was closed, yeah, and was kept closed. 2 years. It was all ready. Yeah. Shastye. There was such a village with the name Shastye, what is in Russian and also Ukrainian seems the Lake of Happiness, yeah, and near Luhansk. And it was kept closed. But, because one of the participating states was not ready to give a millimeter. Yeah? And so also fell at this whole trilateral contact group and all these mechanisms of OCs. Yeah? My last point, only to mention it, we have the same problem with the Council of Europe. Yeah? Because that is really focused on human rights issues, with this agenda, with this charter and all these things, and also some, as we thought, quite strong instruments. For instance, the European Court for Human Rights. Yeah? That is really an instrument that can work when the state will accept the decisions. And normally they do. But Russia, for instance, and others too, Azerbaijan and so on, yeah, did not in the end. Yeah, they said, okay, we can pay some money, yeah, we will put it in the budget from the very beginning, but we will not consider all these recommendations. It is all not for us. Yeah. In the end, they even not pay the money. And but also the court itself was not able to work with the beer they got. All the thousands and thousands of cases, yeah, with a very small budget and not so many employees, yeah, and laws. Some of these judges in the courts also were instrumentalized by their countries. Yeah? They had to fulfill what was said from Moscow and other cities. Yeah? And they did. Yeah? And if the order was not to accept, so it was not to accept. If it was to postpone, we find also a way for that. Yeah? And so such obvious things as this foreign agent law or law on disabled, it was decided 12 years later, 9 years later, almost never. Yeah? And so that hadn't any impact on the political situation, on the real situation with the law, with the NGO, and so on. Yeah? So the function of helping the society to protect their own rights didn't work. Yeah? And any new organization should really resolve these questions. Yeah? What would they do with a participant that is already not ready to accept the common ground? Yeah? And when the conflict is really in contradictory values, the one side, for instance, can say, we are a sovereign country. The other side, you are part of us. We are, we would like to dominate you. Former Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union, so they should be a part of Russia now. Yeah, this is really also not an international organization possible to resolve. Yeah, because it's absolutely contrary angles. yeah, and there's a common ground lost. Yeah, and so there isn't any possibility to incorporate such conflicts in negotiations. Okay, I will.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for this reality check and quite sobering parts. Not going to the open chair, but I would like to really open the floor now to everyone, to the audience. Please don't be shy. Step forward and ask a question, make a comment. Please go ahead. Always those who come to
thank you very much.
in a circle.
Now I stay.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Thank
It's
you
not
very
so far
much,
for you.
Ulrich Schneckener, former German diplomat and Vice President of the Southeast Europe Association. So my field of expertise is mostly Southeastern Europe and Russia, where I spent a couple of years. But I worked also for 2.5 years in the OSCE, 20 years ago, so 20 years ago, so it was a different OSCE certainly at the time, but I remember very much when we got as staff in the Secretariat a briefing on the Minsk group and trying to solve the Nagorno-Karabakh problem, and actually this was a failure in every respect, and now even neither the OSCE nor Council of Europe could do something. They are able to protect the cultural heritage of Armenia in the territory. And coming to your interesting proposal of this greater European Council, I think Armenia would be like Georgia and maybe even Azerbaijan, theoretically candidates for the European Union, isn't it? Georgia is.
Georgia is.
The other two
Armenia
aren't.
would like, yes.
Armenia probably,
Armenia would like it, yes.
Azerbaijan
Doesn't
certainly
matter.
not.
So, but coming to that, I think one should start from such a minor, it's not a minor for Armenia, it's a vital conflict, and therefore very obvious opportunistic reasons the European international community, even the EU, do not want to act, do not want even to help. And how could we overcome this greater European Council? So such a very concrete problem, which would not be a cause for a Third World War, probably. And if we cannot solve such a problem, I think a problem like the Ukraine or Russia war is out of question.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, commentaries? Otherwise, I give it back to the panel for you to try to answer this. I mean, actually, I read in your paper that especially this Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was actually part on the sidelines of the European political community, where a few initiatives were tried to be established, but I don't know about the
and the Minsk
outcome.
group for 30 years, or how long did it exist? Yeah, experts actually only specialized in this conflict.
I would like to go first. There's another one. Would you like to come forward, or? Okay, that's all right.
I just wanted to ask, you mentioned something with the Great European Council helping like smooth transition, European candidate countries. What about the staged accession? Would you like use that as well, or would you kind of like incorporate that?
Staged accession referring mostly to the Western Balkans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also maybe Ukraine.
Okay.
Like if you look at the agriculture, because it's like way bigger than any other country.
Yeah.
And like I was part of the conference in April, and we like discussed this like their agricultural system, because it's right now it's like measured in like hectares. And like Ukraine is way bigger than like Poland or France, so it wouldn't work, and it would also need a renewal.
Yeah, true. Good one. Thank you. Okay.
Sure. So maybe I'll start with the last point. I think, it's still one of the most impressive policy advocacy ideas that have transposed into national politics, because state succession is more or less the lay of the land of the current Austrian foreign ministry as an approach. But the weakness that I see here is it can overcome certain challenges, but it will not solve the problem that they can be stuck on a certain level. It is even foreseen in the concept that you can regress if you do not fulfill certain criteria. And overall, I believe that this might just be another layered waiting room that will ultimately not lead to a full membership. Therefore, the process of trying to smoothen through the greater European Council would be an approach that would hopefully help to, on the one hand, resolve these bilateral veto challenges that happen, because this is not something that is actually written in. They just apply it. There's out of the around 74, 75-ish times that you can veto the accession process, 70 are not codified in the treaties. They just do it. And we believe that, of course, to a certain extent, if you meet regularly in that format, sit around the table, deal with each other, this will prevent that. But it's not an overall remedy. And at the same time, even if I'm not fully convinced by the state accession, it does have its benefits, and it's not mutually exclusive. Yeah? It doesn't mean that maybe a staged accession is not also the modus vivendi how to become a member. The Greater European Council does not prevent. And the second thing, and I mean, if we talk about conflict transformation, yeah, how successful has this meeting between Macron, Pashinyan, and Ali been? What's the result? Look at it. And there's other conflicts in the region that we are talking about that have been simmering for decades, where we have not found a solution in various formats. The Greater European Council is not necessarily a direct remedy to this as well, but we again would believe that while we understand that there is a necessity to work together because we are fundamentally threatened by an aggression that is unprecedented in its scale over the past 7 decades. We should not forget the phrasing that war returned to Europe is a wrong phrasing, because we've had war in Europe even before the 24th of February. We even had war in Ukraine before the 24th of February 2020. The ultimate challenge that we, so to say, would have to understand, and this is something that is not so much related to our proposal, but an assessment that I would make here is, regardless of how that war ends, there's certainly a preference how I see how that war should end, which is the restoration of the full sovereignty of Ukraine in its 1991 borders. But there might very well be a freezing of the conflict. There might be an acceptance of a status quo of the scam referenda that have been held in the Russian Federation. There might be different continuous annexations and whatsoever. If the one or the other happens, because I'm convinced if Ukraine wins this war and is able to defend itself, and I think yesterday proved that we should really enable them with everything that we have to achieve that and protect themselves, that will mean that the Russian Federation, as we know it now, will not exist anymore. And the overall common ground of that different scenarios that I just described is we will have insecurity in our direct neighborhood for the foreseeable future, if not the next decade. And there is a need to react to that. And I think that existing institutions do not fulfill this need, and this is where the Greater European Council would be a possibility to fill that gap.
Thank you. On the agricultural question, or on Karabakh?
I mean, I can also supplement some of the issues Sebastian said. I see it in a similar way that I think this model of staged gradual accession processes has its merits. I think it's at least it's a good idea to rethink the existing technocratic enlargement procedure, which indeed involves these 75 veto options for 27 states. So we have 75 multiplied by 27 in theory. This has to do with that they can veto the opening and the closing of the 35 chapters and so on. So if we can get that off the table, I think that would already be a big relief in this whole enlargement procedure. So you don't need stage accession for that. We simply need consensus that, okay, we skip that kind of procedure, this kind of routine which has been developed and it's written anywhere, that all the member states have the right to say yes or no to opening or closing negotiation on chapters. If we get rid of that, then of course a lot of these legal options would be gone already. But if you want to have this stage model, I think indeed it needs to be the Greater European Council could actually be a format which would make it easier to facilitate that. And I think that would be our argument. So it would not exclude that model, would not, but I think it would it would help actually this model if that will be implemented. But that of course still of course would not of course resolve all the major problems we will have in all these enlargement questions. I think we cannot sit here and say, okay, we have a solution to that. And I think there are the two big things are the question how the EU, a future EU, would operate when it grows to 36 members, and what that would mean for voting procedures within the EU. So this is an open question, regardless whether you have the Greater European Council or not. So that's still an issue. And the second issue is the budget issue. And agriculture is the biggest issue within the budget.
Accession like every 10 years,
Yeah.
every few years.
Which would be, I think we don't have time. We don't have time because of the reasons Sebastian laid out. I think if you want to speed up, stage accession would be the wrong answer to this challenge, honestly. But the two issues are the voting procedures within the enlarged EU, which is an issue now already, and the budget issue, because we cannot go on with this budget. We would need to think about different budget procedures within the EU when the accession would come. And I think this is also something a Greater European Council could at least facilitate if in the best case scenario. Maybe one general remark to what Hannah said earlier. I think we don't see the Greater European Council as a replacement for the EOC. Yeah? I think the Greater European Council in part has, at least how we envision that, has different tasks to do. And we think this more from probably maybe our perspective is maybe too much Brussels-centered in a sense, yeah? Because we think that from the role of the EU and its outreach, which it does already, enlargement policy, neighborhood policy, enlargement cannot go as it stays. Neighborhood policy needs to be rewritten, and the security challenges the EU has to address in its wider neighborhood. Yeah? And we try to bring that together, and that's why we think, okay, before we go on, and then we are not looking too much at the OSC, we're looking more at the EPC, and before we go on with this EPC path where we think that's going nowhere, we thought, okay, let's fresh this up, beef it up, and turn it into something different. To some extent, it will probably take some issues from the plate of the OSCE, But I think there are a lot of other issues where we would all profit from a revitalized OSCE, of course. And that's why I think the Greater European Council should not take Central Asia on board. It should not deal with okay, we need also a format. You're absolutely right. We need a format. We need channels also to envision a different future for Russia and Belarus. That there is something there, and the OSCE would certainly be the natural institution for that. And on the other hand, the EU still needs something, and also non-EU states need something in between. They need something where they can tackle like the burning questions which are there. So I think there is more complementarity. There is some competition here, but I think there is also more complementarity as we might think in the first instances. And, so that would be my main point, replying to your point.
Would you like to react to this,
Yeah.
Heike, and then Stefan?
Yes, I mean, I have some other points, but I mean, this is quite interesting. I understood that you have a very kind of strong Brussels, starting from the Brussels and looking from that outside. But again, the interesting is how would I put it? When I have seen that something works in a multilateral setting, in any type, it needs that those actors who are part of it, that they see the benefits for themselves in it and the incentive. And then it starts working. Because, like I mentioned in OSCE context, if a participating state sees the added value on certain projects and the things, then, and that's a difference in fact between the EU and OSCE. If there is one, for example, Western Balkan country that is not member of the EU but is member of the OSCE and wants a certain project, it's much easier to implement with the OSCE because they are part of it. So they are asked, what do you want to do? How do you want to do? When EU comes, it comes quite often and says, yes, we have actually 10 times more money than OSCE, but you have to do this and this and this. So the starting process is very different. And that's why sometimes OSCE can do things with the much less money with nearly the same results, and that's something to think about. But then I would like to react on to this how to solve the conflicts, which probably would come on the challenge on the Greater European Council aspect or something like that. Because yes, one can say that Minsk Group has existed 30 years and the failure when Azerbaijan attacked Armenia, one could say, okay, all the work went like that. But again, I would not necessarily, because it's easy to say that retrospectively, but each time there was a certain reason. I mean, it was used to a certain way of exchanging information, gathering information, getting to know each other, the trust building issues. Yes, if a government eventually then decides from their internal political perspective, now it's time to attack, there is no organization in this world or country who can stop that. And that, to me, is good to remember. The same thing about the OSCE's SMM, kind of the monitoring mission, which was the largest OSCE operation in the eastern Ukraine, functioned since the 2014, 2015 onwards, did not prevent the war, and this is sometimes criticized quite strongly on the OSCE, that how come?
Now not even protecting the cultural heritage.
But there is a lot of aspects which then needs to be taken into consideration, that what that monitoring mission did during that time, there wasn't channels open, discussions, gathering information, etc., which are all important information, also the post-conflict aspects, and once we start kind of rebuilding issues. So yes, one can, if you want, to see it as a failure. On the other hand, it was the solution that was found in that particular time, and it worked to a certain point, and then it didn't work anymore. And that's the nature of international politics, I suppose, that we have certain solutions, and then eventually comes a time when that doesn't quite work anymore, and then we need to find new ones. And that's where, and my final point about the diplomacy, in the way that also I would almost like to comment on the European political community, but never mind. The thing about the diplomacy, in the way that there needs always to be multiple meetings. One meeting is never going to solve. It is quite fascinating to see how world leaders always kind of gallop into the meetings, and it's a very ground and status, and like you said, the pictures and things. And then when you start looking at substance, what happened? Not much at all. But when you start having about 20 of these, then eventually something starts coming, or in a different formats. So I would, for example, relating to the war between Russia and Ukraine, I would say that all of the meetings that has happened, the ones that were in already 22, in a different formats, whether it's in Qatar or Turkey or without Russia or whatever the formats, informal channels between Russia and US, so all of that, kind of builds us towards something. And all of that is important. So one meeting will never solve any problems unless it's been worked years, and then it highlights, and then it looks like that, wow, these three kind of signed some kind of a big declaration. But that's, if you think of the 1975 Helsinki Accords, so that was what, 4 or 5 years in preparation before it came to that. So time and patience is always needed in international politics.
Stefan, and then okay, yeah.
Yes, it is a bit to my point. I have the assumption that such a great European Council also must be a talking shop. Yeah, that cannot be avoided. Yeah, it's impossible to start with some decisions. Yeah, as Hannah said just now. Yeah, we have so many conflicts in the room. Yeah, and we have in the room also this tendency of nationalization of a lot of countries. Yeah, also it would be very careful look for keeping their interests. Yeah, and not be willing to give up something to a new common good structure. That is an interpretation. This is the aim. Yeah. First, it's only a structure. First, it's only a meeting point. Yeah. Maybe it can become a structure after a lot of meetings. Yeah. And so it really also should be prepared very thoroughly and in the long term. Yeah? So I do not see this bridging also, yeah? Because we need it today. Yeah? What I see is, of course, we have an interest to get a structure where all countries in Europe can really take part. Yeah? What you do not have, in fact. Yeah? Or only for more tight agenda. Yeah? And this new possible structure also should, of course, work with the problem that we always have to find a balance between the local things, the regional things, the national things, and the more multilateral things. Yeah? And for the EU, that's a big problem. Yeah? To define in a good manner where are these things overlapping, what can be done if they are overlapping, what can be fixed as a local thing, as a regional thing, and so on. Yeah? And so we get in question all these multilateral organizations also because of getting more and more rights to decide on. Yeah, and maybe it's not needed. Maybe it's even harmful. In my last question, only to mention it, who will secure our security if we see a victory of Trump?
Victory of Trump, yeah. Yes, absolutely. And also not to mention or add to all of that, yes, people of France just rejected a far-right led government, but as everybody on TV said, nobody really won. So we will also see a quite paralyzed France going forward, most probably. And that added to potential victory of Donald Trump, would ask a lot of these questions in a much more urgent and brutal way. You had a question?
Yes. To circle back a bit, in computer science we have this running joke that whenever there's 14 standards and you try to introduce another unifying standards to get rid of those 14, you end up with 15 standards. And that kind of, to me, it sounds like what's happening here. I during the talk, I had a couple of questions coming up regarding the bureaucratic effort this would take, regarding the quorum this would take, regarding the freedom of decision this council would have. And to me, it sounds like a lot of parallel structures, a lot of overhead. And I don't also fully see who would realize such a council, and with what responsibilities the forum that would realize such a council would have to kind of manage it.
Thank you. Also, thanks for bringing in the computer science analogy, because it's true that thanks really here for also diving in with us in these questions of institutional design, which are not often actually posed and are, of course, not the easiest ones to be tackled, but I think very necessary. Please.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, just a statement regarding OSCE. It's one of the most important organizations we have worldwide. And when we see the history of the OSCE, there would be a lot of projects would be destroyed or never would start in secure without the OSCE. So I think they are without any alternative in the history today and in the future. But this was just a statement from myself. So my question is to Sebastian, to Mr. Professor, sorry, I missed the name. You made a very high sophisticated paper about this possible greater European Council. My question to this is, and maybe I'm against the rest of the audience here, possible, but one have to be the advocatus diabolo. This will cost billions again. And the European Union is more expensive than everybody thought before already. The next issue is, what could be the reason for this great European Council? Sorry, because if we want to talk together, we can't talk with everybody. We can make every day a round table, can call everybody, say, come here, sit down, or we come to you, or whatever, we meet, whatever, and we can't talk about everything. We don't have to establish a council beside the council, which costs money, and which will be paid by the countries with the money, and not with the country without the money. This is, from my perspective, I do not understand why there have to be an organization beside the organization, in parallel, above, or is this maybe just the carrot, to hang the carrot in front of these new countries, which we call to the round table? The carrot, okay, come to us, come closer to us, we can better control you, and maybe we show you the carrot of a possible membership in the European Union, but only if you are working in the right way with us. Sorry to say, ask for this in the clear words. And the last And the last statement, what Sebastian said, and Sebastian we know from other meetings. So Sebastian said we have to assist, we have to support the Ukraine to, let's say, to be able to fight against Russia. I do not want to say win the war. Winning a war means they have to be a loser also. But let's say, yes. I travel frequently to Russia and to Belarus, frequently. Every 2 months, I think I'm in Moscow and in Minsk. I was in Minsk 3 days ago. And one thing I can promise you, and this I'm not a prophet, so just can promise you, maybe Russia will not win, but for sure they will not lose. And let's say when the European Union and the rest of the world is not very smart in this what they do, and this means not to say, okay, have the Ukraine. No. Not very smart in talking with these people in the East. Let's say they will stop earliest on the Ukrainian-Polish border because they have no reason to stop before. So I'm there, let's say six or seven times a year in Moscow, and I worked for big companies in Moscow 16 years, and believe me, I know how these people think. So there should be maybe also a discussion about this. We can have some wishes on what we think, what is good, but maybe we have to understand how the other people also think, to understand, to protect ourselves, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's a different reading of the paper as well, I think there's just also mentioned a confrontational aspect here in the paper that if, as you say, they don't see a reason, I guess you're assuming or you're referring to the Russian regime to stop until the Ukrainian-Polish border, then I think that is difficult then to find a common space of dialogue on the basis of that.
They see no reason to stop before if there are no other discussions before or any diplomatic issues happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then it's always the question with what kind of preconditions you go into these discussions, right?
We will sit until tomorrow and we'll have no answer for this.
Yeah. Please,
I want also to say something, but she has been raising the finger.
I wanted to add something to the question about the institutional design. Because you mentioned this body should be able to do decisions that doesn't have. So who makes does just one country make a decision, everybody agrees, and we implement them through a system, or is everyone do it on their own national policies? That's what I want to know.
Okay. One question taken.
Yeah, thanks first of all to apologies. One respect that I'm not positioned very strategically for asking questions in that way. Yeah, no, so too far away. And secondly, for the fact that I did not read the paper, so maybe the paper would get my question. I was mainly triggered by sort of the relation between this Greater European Council and the security situation of Europe. Because one of you mentioned that one of the goals of the Greater European Council would be to discuss or to cooperate more on security outside of Russia. My question is sort of what security problem would be left for this council to take over? Because there are already some organizations that do a lot with EU security. In my opinion, NATO is the most important one that already has most of the countries with the biggest military in Europe. Could always have more, of course, but I'll leave that point here for now. Then there's the EU that's talking a lot about sort of creating a military-industrial complex and doing a lot with logistics in terms of security. Then there are the relatively smaller conflicts, and there I think maybe the OSCE is better suited, as some already mentioned. So what is sort of left for this greater EU Council?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, then I would give it back to the panel. You also had a question?
Yes, I have one question, perhaps one can add. Once again, my question is, what would this greater European Council be good for if not for solving, finding solutions? Solutions to concrete conflicts which are endangering either regional or larger stability. And I did not really get an answer to the question what happens with Nagorno-Karabakh. With all the diplomacy we had for decades, etc., this is a bad solution, what we have now, a very bad. And because it is the right of the stronger. Azerbaijan could simply do it. There's not, so they don't care. And there's no outcry from the international community. There's no all the values which are the basis of the OSCE, as well as of the EU, as well as of the Council of Europe, which is not in the political conflict, but regarding once again the protection of cultural heritage. I don't see anything. I don't see it. The values are gone. And if either we want a value-based, and I thought this greater European Council is also trying to promote this rule-based order or to defend this rule-based order, because that's exactly what Russia is attacking. The rule-based order in Europe and in the world. And so if we would have, I would not mind, if this greater European Council will bring or foster, bring back, we have lost it right now, rule-based order, I would be very much, even if it costs a lot of money, in favor of it.
I think what Hannah was also saying earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, was that basically in that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict was brushed away by the will of one of the parties to the conflict. And then, of course, the question is, would the Greater European Council have the institutional design or power mandate to push back against such a move, basically? But this you will have the opportunity to answer. But there's another. We're getting started really here with discussion. So there's another question.
Let me ask or add another aspect to the discussion and to the interesting paper, because if we talk about international organizations coming of age and proposing something new, institutionalized, and leaving aside the origins of European Union and NATO, then I think we have to discuss a little bit, for example, about economics and about what were the roots of NATO. The roots of EU were economic cooperation. Mm-hmm. Partly we lost sight of this in the last decade also, or even longer, which enabled nationalist parties in the Netherlands, in Slovak Republic, in Hungary and Italy to take governments over. They are also sharing governments in Finland, in Sweden, in Denmark, in France, in Portugal, in Bulgaria, in Croatia. And maybe in the future also in Austria. We don't forget Austria. So there is a problem. You lost this out of sight, and when NATO was established in 1948 and 49, the first Secretary General pointed out the cause of NATO. Keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. After 1989, when the Iron Curtain fell, NATO had always problems to say what is their original purpose. And they didn't find it really. And if you look around, like Hungary's prime minister is touring around to Zelensky, to Putin, to Xi Jinping, he's a member of NATO. If you look at Turkey, he is a member of NATO, and we claim NATO is a value-based organization. I think it's no longer. And in both cases, I think we have to think about what's the influence of economy in this international organizations coming of age. WTO doesn't function any longer, and other organizations as well. Humanitarian aid of United Nations supplemented organizations work more or less, but they are also partly dysfunctional because the states don't give the money which is needed. This led, for example, to the situation of 2015. United Nations claimed already in 2013 there isn't enough money to feed people in Syria and Lebanon coming from in Turkey and Lebanon who came from Syria. The states didn't deliver the money. All of you can say a lot of pledges, conferences, and in the end, if you ask 2 years later, was this money really given? Normally, it was not given. So this economic side is, I think, a very important side, and maybe I overheard it, but I didn't hear anything in this paper. Sorry.
Well, thank you for the question and giving it back to them.
Maybe I can start with the last remark from Klaus Pömpers. Yeah, I thought I somehow recall your face and name. I guess generally one has to say that we are, and not just since February 22, we observe a crisis of international organization and multilateral fora, which goes back, I think, way back to the 2010s, maybe even earlier. I mean, this has to do with a number of crises, economic crises as well as security crises we have seen, and of course the confrontation with Putin's Russia has not started on the 22nd of February. So it started in 2014 and even before. So we see a number of the international system is not in good shape, to put it that way. Yeah? And it's clear that what we propose here, very modestly, will not solve that, and it will not solve a lot of other issues as well. Yeah? So the Greater European Council, we don't see that as like the silver bullet of the international system, or not even of the European regional system. We see that as a possibility which needs to be explored, which needs probably to be tested, which could, and of course it needs to be proven in practice at the end of the day. Sure, I totally agree with what many people said. It may fail, it may not go anywhere, yeah. But so does the European political community, to my understanding. Yeah. But I think Macron had a point when he was thinking about this idea of not greater European conference, that's our idea, but Macron is free to take it up. That's of course not our issue. But he had a point when he came up with this proposal very early, a few weeks after the invasion started. He came up with that proposal for a European political community, which was actually not liked by Zelensky. Zelensky was very critical on that when it came out, when Macron held its speech in May 22. I think he still had a point. He sensed there is a vacuum. There's a certain kind of security vacuum, and that's why he came up with that proposal. We think that is just too short-sighted. It's not going the full way, and that's why we propose this Greater European Council as trying to go the full way. Whether it will be successful, whether it could solve some of the issues which are indeed there, whether it could repair the international or at least the European system of organizations. That's all open. These are all open questions, I think, and this can only be answered by practice. I think it cannot be answered by academic writings or theories, and so I would totally agree with that. Also, I think the Greater European Council would not be in the first place, from how we conceive that, a conflict resolution mechanism. Yeah? And I think maybe there are others are better placed in that. However, I would also not rule out that option, that if in such an established format, after some time of practice, after some time of confidence and trust building, that this format can also play a role in that. And as you said, there might be many meetings, but maybe many meetings lead to some goal eventually on different levels, in different organizations, in different constellations, and so on. And therefore, I think in an more institutionalized setting than the EPC can offer, then maybe this conflict resolution aspect could be nurtured and could be further developed. But I think it would not be the starting point for the Greater European Council. The starting point is much more these two issues we were focusing on, which are trans-regional security issues, and this implies a wider aspect of security. So we're not talking about military and defense or in the first place, because indeed that is more the business of NATO. But we talk about human security, we talk about the linkage of security and economy, economic security as well. We talk about technology, we talk about issues like cybersecurity, digital disinformation. Okay, NATO is also addressing this. The EU is addressing this, but I think this is also something. The OSCE is also addressing it. Yes. And the United Nations, yeah, but all not very okay. Let's see. But I think there are a number of security issues of common concern, and I think that would be the starting point. And the other pillar of that Greater European Council would certainly be the enlargement and neighborhood question. Where not all of the 40-something members of the Greater European Council would have a great interest, but a certain segment of that countries would have an interest. And here we hope that the Greater European Council could facilitate these complicated processes we have described earlier. I think these are the two main functions that this council could have. And otherwise, I think we would totally overburden that structure from the very beginning. I think if it should solve everything and also these difficult conflicts and so on. I'm glad that one cannot blame the Greater European Council for getting it wrong on Nagorno-Karabakh, since it did not exist so far. But I totally share what you said about Nagorno-Karabakh. And it showed that the setting of the European political community was not appropriate, or was not like, could not stop Aliyev from the plans he had developed. Anyhow, for whatever reasons. Yeah. So I just want to emphasize that the Greater European Council cannot address all the issues, cannot solve all the issues, but can be concentrated on the 2 points I made. I think it will not cost a lot. I mean, coming to your point. I think our understanding is, and also what you said about the computer science earlier, our understanding is that it would be back-to-back meetings with the European Council. So we have an existing structure. This is there. The structure is there. This is the European Council structure, and it just needs to extend it. We already have that back-to-back meetings in some of the EPC meetings. When you think of the Prague meeting or of the Spanish presidency in Grenada. So that is, I think that the costs are not really an issue. And I think it's not about that the EU should control that EPC. Yeah? I think that would be a real danger in the sense, if this is just seen as another kind of waiting room for those who wait already for too long. Yeah? If that would be one bad misunderstanding, which would undermine the whole emphasis of what we are advocating. And the second undermining would be if that would be the impression that it's simply about the EU wants to control all the rest. Yeah? Because I think we see this more as a two-way street, and that's what was Sebastian pointed out in his intervention earlier, that it is also a problem. The EU has a problem to enhance legitimacy for its policy, for its external governance policies. This gap in terms of legitimacy has been widening over the past years, and so maybe it is better to try this out in a format where all the concerned parties are a part of that and talk about the same pot of money, basically, and then decide maybe more jointly what to do with it.
Can I just add 3 points very briefly? First of all, because one of the questions that was asked, what will be a decision-making procedure? That's modeled on the enhanced cooperation procedure that is in the Treaty of Lisbon, actually, since the Treaty of Amsterdam, which means like countries cannot prevent other countries from cooperating in an aspect that they want to put things further that is not yet in the competences of the European Union. And in this case, it would be you work together, but nobody can force you to join, but you can also not prevention of other countries taking common decisions. Second thing, the costs have been addressed already a bit, but I would also like to stress here that the overall administrative costs of the European Union are minimal in comparison to other administrations that are existing in EU member states and outside of EU member states. So this is...
And just think about the cost we would have if we would not have the common market. This would be extraordinary.
The loss of earnings.
It's a net calculation that is not taking net into consideration or has a wrong assumption of what net actually is. The third thing, conflicts. What is the most successful conflict transformation tool that we've experienced on this continent? It's European integration. And European integration would be the ultimate outcome of a cooperation in the Greater European Council, which would mean that if we do that, and I've heard a lot of arguments actually for the Greater European Council also here, these regular meetings, this is exactly that what we are proposing. It's there, the structure is there, they meet 4 times a year at least. We do that on the day before, can be on the day after, but it's anticlimactic, I would guess. And as already mentioned, these things already function, already are there. We have Western Balkans contact group or whatever it's called in the framework of the EU that meets before and these European countries. So this is there, and I think this would be the answer, because ultimately, if they enable the transition to become a new member, that also will transform the conflict. And one last, very last, just comment as a reply, because I agree with the assessment that they will that the Russian Federation or the current regime will stop at the Polish-Ukrainian border. Why? Because there is NATO. And this is a thing that we need to take into consideration, because this is one of the things that we also believe the Greater European Council could maybe contribute to. We wasted 4 years because we were leaning back and not preparing for Trump coming back. And this is something that will be necessary. While I'm not traveling to Russia anymore, for also obvious reasons, I also do have a certain understanding of its people. I work with them and still are in contact with them, and this is exactly the reason why they need to use that. This is exactly the reason why they need to be losing and why there has to be a loser, because it's threatening all of us. We just haven't fully grasped and understood that yet.
They meaning the regime in this case.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you for the whole discussion, but maybe I misunderstood the concept. So after an hour, I still don't get the main idea of this new institution. So actually, it's just a big bang with the possibility to join any country within the European Union and non-European states, concerning the discussion on the basis of the security. But also you mentioned a lot of spheres like technology and everything, but do you really think that it could work? Like, is it not too much? And also about the security, are you considering the migration crisis? Are you considering the migration policies? Because I think it's one of the hot topics, and it's also like about the security, and also I have like certain doubts about the political view and the existence of it of many European countries, and I don't understand the concept of the European political community. So could you elaborate on this expression? So I'm not a political scientist, maybe it's a special expression, but as we can see, as a result of the recent elections, I think that a lot of people didn't even consider like Russian-Ukrainian war as the big problem. They are like ordinary people are thinking about basic stuff, and I think this new institution won't work, and maybe it could worsen the situation with the introducing tolerant structures, and I have doubts about the participating of the countries. Of course, we should test it, but could you really imagine that, for example, Hungary will really participate in such institution and will really Hungary? Yeah. Like you told, and somebody mentioned like that the European integration is a great tool of prevention of conflicts, but as you can see, some countries use this integration as a facade, and we can see like this decreasing of the rule of law and like a lot of conflicts and misunderstanding with the execution of the European Court of Human Rights decisions, for example, by the side of the Poland and Hungary. So I think there are a lot of problems that should be solved, but with the existing structures, and if we would like to introduce this new structure, would it consider these existing problems or only focus on the security issues? So
thanks for the point.
Yeah, I tried to mix up, but also like
no problem. It's okay. It's a bit late to reopen up the whole institutional design, but if it's okay, it's almost 8 o'clock now, and I would say I'll give it quickly back to the panel, and then we wrap it up and basically continue the discussion bilaterally while having maybe a glass of wine and listen to some nice live music that we prepared. Who wants to go first from the panelists? Stefan, you?
Yes, I can start. I have left, I think, 2 points, and they are, of course, interconnected. The first, any new structure and also any old structure have to deal with the question how to integrate countries who are, in fact, of different strongness. I don't know how to say it, strengths. They have more people or less people, they are bigger or less, they have more money or less, and they can contribute more or less. And they do. And we had, as well with the OSCE, as also with the Council of Europe, twice the situation that Russian government really blackmailed the whole organization by not paying its contribution for years. And that they were not able to work, in fact. And that means that such a bigger country can do, and others cannot, and should not, and will not, because they are more interested in such common structures. And also, you cannot integrate in such a common concept leadership or government who really insists on being a big power, having superpower on others, subordinate other countries, and really insist on its imperial interests. And that means it cannot be a part of this. So it will be besides. Or as this paper said, it will be in confrontation. And how to get to a value-based new organization who really will give all countries the same power and the same voice, and the same right. That is really an open question. And I would, of course, be in favor for revitalization of OSCE, and we will have, I think, a special discussion on it another time. But that's also very difficult. And all these structures, all the ones or new ones, also should get the support from the societies. So the societies should also understand what is this, as you said, the common good in this organization, and how is it helping this good to become even more, and is it also not obvious? No.
The last word I can go. So, no, the only thing, I suppose, very interesting discussions, and I think that at least one of the greater European Council idea, this thing that how to perhaps answer better to the call of non-EU member states, because I think that's the starting point from your ideas quite a bit. So that's something to think about. But what I've seen quite a bit relating to any framework, NATO, EU, OSCE, UN, any bilateral thing, when things are going like we described in the beginning, you know, there is a certain transformation. Something old has been left behind, we go into somewhere new, but we don't know. So we have a huge need to find new solutions also. But somehow that seems to be easier thing than to come up with new use for the old mechanisms. Because I would strongly argue, not only this time the OSCE perspective, but even EU and a NATO and possibly UN, that in fact, if we would put quite a bit of effort for looking at the old mechanisms and how we could reinvigorate them or find them again, or because in all of these multilateral settings, there are a lot of things that are hidden and we can't even remember what are the mechanisms. So if we would start using them, we might in fact find solutions even faster than the new ones. But somehow our mind always wants to find also new solutions. So that is something that I've actually discovered relating to the OSCE very much. And this is something I try to argue internally in the organizations as well. But I've noticed that that's not always easy to do it that way around. It's much easier to look forward and come up with something new. So for you to comment the final thing.
Thank you. The sexiness of newness. Always.
Take it. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, first, I think I still have to emphasize the Greater European Council, as we conceive it, is not a new organization. It's a format. It's not. It's a format. It's a club. Yeah, it's a club. I mean, some of my research. I worked on the concept of club governance, which is about the informalization also of international politics, which we have seen over the last decades developing. So we have different multilateral formats, we have the different G groups, stuff like that. So these are typical clubs. And these clubs are more flexible, more informal. Of course, they are more intergovernmental. Some are very important, like the G7. Some are maybe less well known. We have them on sectoral issues and different policy sectors. So we know a number of these clubs. And so in a way, this Greater European Council is also conceived as a club, as a EU plus club.
It should be a Greater European Club.
No, yeah, we call it council because we want to link it to the existing council structure. But it's not a new organization, and many in this research on club governance, you can see it's not always happening, how clubs could complement international organizations and regional organizations. Yeah? And this is actually the path from the more conceptual point of view, if you want to, where we actually coming from in this design. The second issue I would like to raise is indeed, again, the EPC, I think that's your point, the European Political Community is still there, it's already existing, so that's not a new idea from us. That has been the Macron idea. It's meeting next week. We don't think that this will be a long-lived experiment. It may continue. There is the talk that the next presidency will be, the next meeting will be under Hungarian host. So you can think about what Orban is going to make out of that. We will see the turnout of states, and government. Yeah, make Europe great again. Exactly. Yeah, I think that could be. That could be Greater European Council. That could be a good motto for that. But I think Orban will use that as his own show, and we will have to see how many states and heads of states of government are prepared to join him in this show. So I think the next meeting will be even more crucial of the EPC. And then some rumors that Albania will take over the following meeting. And I think if we continue like that, you already see what the problems are. So that's why we think pull it back, bring it into a more tidy up structure, and then avoid such problems that you have suddenly Orban as a host. Yeah. So that would be the second point. And the third point is, which popped up several times here in the discussion, and which I absolutely share, and this is also the very important one, is that the window of opportunity is closing. If we look into these elections, if we look into the question of societal support, there was a window of opportunity very early on after February 22. There was a greater consensus in this crisis, in this immediate crisis of the war, that EU states got their act together in some surprising way sometimes, yeah. And we are now losing pace, we are now losing time, and we have the internal problems, the domestic issues you were pointing out. And the more we get of that, the less we will have the opportunities which we try to draft in our paper. So I see also that we are under pressure that this window of opportunity is actually closing. We probably won't see anything of that. So I wonder whether that's the better alternative.
Yeah, that's right. Sebastian, over to you.
Not too much to add, and to keep everyone from getting the well-deserved refreshments, simply just the two things. You were referring to conflicts with rule of law and within the European Union. European integration has overcome cross-border conflicts, but of course we also see now evolving other conflicts within the EU institutional design. This is something that will go hand in hand with a reform of the treaties, where the Greater European Council is not something that will be involved here. I would also, again, because the question of funding and economy has been coming up, if we use the Greater European Council to facilitate amongst those countries, Ulrich has mentioned that there are already grants that are there from potential participating states, but I want to stress here again, there is funding that exists for the European neighborhood, and this is something that, as Ulrich said, it's obsolete. The Eastern Partnership is obsolete, and there is already then funding that would get free out of this. And the last part is, I think we need to make content great again, but that's not such a cool acronym that you can stitch on a hat and use. And I very much agree, we don't need new initiatives. Therefore, this is not a new initiative in the sense that we want another institution. It's an initiative to bring the success story of European integration on the table in a window of opportunity that is rapidly closing us. With this, I would like to say thank you very much. Very good comments. We take that into consideration, certainly for the revision of the paper, and thank you for the lovely cooperation that we've had.
Thank you.
With the dialogue.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming on this hot summer evening. Thanks to all the panelists for your contributions. I think it was great to look into the future of Europe's European integration and Europe's security order, and I think even if it won't be a greater European Council, sometimes you need also an idea and a name and a tag for to discuss the problems that are and the challenges that are behind this. What this council would address, actually. So thank you very much all for coming out. We have Mehdi Shama with us, a Moroccan multi-instrumentalist and musician who will play gwembri, a traditional instrument, and actually combines a mix of Gnawa, blues, jazz, a little acoustic set. Please stay in touch with us, with both the Global Unit for Human Security and the Dialogue Office generally, and its activities. Follow us on social media, and thanks again for coming. The last word is with the Office Director.
Thank you to the team of the Dialogue Office who prepared it all for us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.